everyone, it's Lisa from My Dream in Soap. Welcome back to my channel for all of you lovely people who keep watching my videos, and welcome to any newbies as well. Now for today's video I'm actually showing you some soaps that I made to enter the Design Mania competition. Now this is a competition held by Making Soap magazine. So if you're a soap maker, why not think about next time it comes round, perhaps doing an entry yourself. Now how it works is you're given a selection of techniques in the Making Soap magazine, and you have to choose which of those techniques you want to do, and you can enter up to 2 soaps as long as they are each doing a different technique. And for this year there were 4 techniques to choose from. So the first technique was a triple ombre soap. The second was a gemstone soap. The third was a swirl called a sea wind swirl. And lastly there was a swan swirl. So the original plan for this competition was that Wit from Cheeky Goat Soap and I were going to split the designs between us and do 2 each. So how we divided them up was on the basis that I don't like melt and pour. It's not that I don't really like it, it's just that I struggle to use it and to get it in an assessment, and if I make a soap using melt and pour I couldn't sell it, that sort of thing. So it's just really awkward for me. And Wit has an intense dislike of round soaps. So therefore I decided I would do the Swan Swirl, she would do the gemstone soaps, and then we just divided up the other. She fancied the ombre, so I did the sea swirl. Now unfortunately, as it happens, things took over Whitney's life and she didn't have time to actually do her soap, so I'm not going to link you to her video because there isn't one, I'm afraid, so you've just got mine. I'm going to start with my sea wind swirl first, so I'm using apple sage from Brambleberry. And then for colour I'm using some activated charcoal and titanium dioxide. And then actual colours, electric blue from You Make It Up, and then some neon purple and neon yellow, both of those are from Mica Mama. Now I did check with the organisers to see how close to the tutorial we had to be, and they came back and said that as long as we followed the style of the soap we could choose any colours that we liked. So although this was called a sea wind swirl, it didn't have to be sea colours that we were using. Now I don't want to have my colours straight as they came out of the pot. I want to muck around and tweak them a little bit. So I am going to have some of that purple, which I will be toning down a little bit because it's a neon. But then I also want a green, so I'm going to combine the yellow and the blue together for that. And then I want a nice sort of magenta colour as well. Now I know I normally have my micas already dispersed in some oil in most of my videos. I just thought I would just go through the process of what I do when I have something like a pigment or a neon, because those can be quite tricky to actually get dispersed properly, and just mixing them in is quite likely to give you spots and specks in your soaps. Or if you try and blend them in, you do actually have to blend them for quite a long time to get a nice smooth coverage. So what I do, as you can see here, is I drop them into the base of the jug that I'm going to be using. I add a little bit of oil from the batch oils that I'm going to be using. You could use extra oil, some from your batch, really doesn't matter. And then I just really mix them and rub the spatula up and down the side of the jug, and really spend quite a bit of time really pulverise and smushing those granules up. And I do keep checking just to make sure I haven't got any little bits of specks and spots, and I find this is a really good way to make sure they're properly dispersed. Now this is a pour that's done all at the same time, so I've got all of the oils that I need for my entire soap all melted down and in my jug. and then also my lye solution. Now this is something that needs to stay reasonably fluid, and I always soak between 80 and 90 degrees F, so I'm going to go more towards the lower range there just to make sure that my soap doesn't start setting up at all. Now I've got a little bit of mucking around still to do with my colours, because although I've sorted the main colours that I want, I do want to sort of slightly alter the shading of them as well with that activated charcoal and the titanium dioxide. So that means that as I mix this soap together now, I'm literally going to barely take it to an emulsion. As long as it's mixed up and I keep stirring it around so it can't separate out, that's going to do for me. Now I've jumped ahead and got to the point where I've actually just split my batter out into even parts. This piece in my main jug, I'm just going to make it a grey colour, so a touch of activated charcoal, not too much because I want to lighten it to a grey with some titanium dioxide, and obviously the more activated charcoal you're going to have to put in, the more titanium dioxide you're going to have to put in. And then I'm just going to take those other colours, again where I've separated out the soap batter, and get them all nicely mixed in, and then I'm going to tweak those again with the titanium dioxide to get the colours I want. Now I know it probably looks like I'm just randomly pouring amounts of TD into these. I have measured out and weighed the amount of titanium dioxide I've got in my little pot, so I can keep an exact eye on how much I'm using for my assessment and things like that. And then when I'm pretty happy with my colours, I'm just going to add my fragrance oil and just divide it out between the colours. Now when you're adding fragrance oil to several different colours, I know I've said this before, make sure that you stir it in as you're going through. Quite often see people plopping in fragrance oil and just leaving it sitting on the top of a colour and then going back to stirring it, and then wonder why sometimes they get some funny reactions. And sometimes people think that a fragrance oil has riced when actually it hasn't. It's just that you've left it sitting there as a blob on the top of your soap. So do make sure that you stir it in as you're going through so it gets a chance to disperse around your soap. Now this fragrance oil is pretty well behaved. It does accelerate my soap recipe a little bit, but not badly, but it's certainly not one of those that keeps my batter fluid for, you know, sort of like hours and hours as it were, but it's fine for this technique. Now this is a squeeze bottle technique, so I'm going to transfer these into squeeze bottles, not surprisingly. I tend to like a smaller squeeze bottle, so obviously you could pour the whole lot of each colour individually into a squeeze bottle and be done with it. Or if you're like me, I prefer the smaller ones because they tend to be softer and a lot easier to squeeze. So I'd much rather have a small squeeze bottle that is easier for me to squeeze and use, and then I'll just top it up halfway through. I will keep an eye on the batter that I've got left in the jug because that's the easiest thing to check and have a look at, and that will tell me when I've got to the right consistency to enable me to start pouring. If I poured right now, then my batter's too thin, it's still barely past emulsion at this stage, and everything would just muddle together. So I am waiting for that thinnest trace to actually appear, and then I'll start to pour. Okay, so for this pour, we're just going to go through and I'm going to have sort of three main colours that are going to give me sort of like the bands of my soap. There's going to be three colours going up the soap, but it needs to be interspersed with a couple of little extra sort of accent colours. So as you can see, all I'm doing is I'm just laying down the batter. And not using any dividers, I guess in theory you possibly could use, but that wasn't in the technique, so it was a non-divider technique. And just squirting little bits of each of those 3 main colours that I want for that first layer. And then I'm just going to add in a little tad of those accent colours, and then just repeat that up through the soap. So I went through until I finished up all of my batter, and it's a little bit messy on the top there because that's where I've just scraped out and got all the scraps out of my squeeze bottles. And then I'm just going to swirl it. Now this is going to be a horizontally cut bar, a bit like you cut a Taiwan swirl. So really all you're doing is, I guess, sort of similar to a peacock swirl really, is you're just taking your skewer and just going one way down. So you're not going down and then back up again, and just doing sort of S's down through the soap. And each time you get to the bottom of your mould, take the skewer out and clean it, and then go to the top and swirl through again. And then once that's all done, I'm going to cover it as normal and pop it in the oven to C-pop and leave it there overnight, and we'll cut it the next day. So I've jumped forward onto that second soap, and this is going to be that Swan Swirl. And as you can see here, I've got to the stage where I've already mixed up my colours that I want, and I'm just going to add in my fragrance oil. Now for this soap I'm going to be using Damson Plum, Rose and Patchouli, and that's from Candle Shack in the UK. Now this first part of the pour that I'm doing is not actually part of the Swan Swirl. What I've decided is that I kind of want to jazz the swirl up a little bit, so therefore, as this is a round soap, I'm going to do a rimmed soap surrounding the Swan Swirl. So therefore what I'm doing at the moment is just making a rim. Now, I know this is looking spookily similar to the last soap that I did, but all I'm just doing here is just layering the various colours into a mould, and then I'm just going to give it a little bit of a swirl through and then leave that to set up. I will make sure that it does go through gel. It's really important if you're doing a rim that you force your soap to go through gel, because it gives it that nice flexible consistency. And when you've done that, then you can use it when it's ready. I do tend to just let mine gel and use it again the next day. Some people, when they do a rim, they sort of make sure it only sets up for a couple of hours so it's still flexible, but I have no problem. As long as I force gel on mine, I never have my rims cracking or anything. And then once I've got everything poured in, I'm just going to swirl this soap. I'm just really concentrating on that I don't want the soap swirl to be too uniform. I sort of want it to be quite feathery going around the edge of these rimmed soaps. So as you can see, I sort of dither around a bit and try lots of various different swirls. I am conscious that I don't want to over swirl it, but as you can see, this sort of almost Taiwan swirl thing that I do initially, I'm not really keen on it. I'm just all the time imagining how this soap, like this, is going to look wrapped around a bar. So as you can see, I just keep mucking around until eventually I get something that I'm happy with. So the next day I've sliced off some thin layers of my soap and put them into my moulds. Now I deliberately haven't done that on video because I've got several rim soap videos already, and I'll put a link to those so you can see exactly how I do that process. But what we need to do with this Swan Swirl is have one divider that just goes into the middle of the soap, and that's going to divide two colours of soap up, and then that second divider is what we're going to use to spin around in the soap to give the Swan Swirl effect. And then I've mixed up the soap that I want for the centre of these soaps, and I'm going to have that turquoisey blue colour on its own, and then that plummy magenta and the white, I'm just going to do that as an in the pot swirl for the other half. So in with my fragrance oil again. I'm using exactly the same as I did for the rim, that damson, plum, rose and patchouli. And then I'm just going to add the white to that magenta colour to get my in the pot swirl, and then we can just pour into these moulds. I haven't tried it because I wanted to obviously stick exactly to the technique that was specified for the competition, but I really think that you probably could do this with just the smaller divider, because if you think about, if you do like a clamshell pour or anything, if you pour soap carefully out of two jugs, it will self-divide without needing an extra divider. So I kind of think if I did this again, I would probably just do the one small divider, and I don't think you'd have any leakage between the two. Just saves you mucking around with lots of extra dividers. And obviously the other issue is if you're filling the centre of your soap out with lots of dividers, it does mean that as you then take them out, that soap level is going to then drop, whereas the less stuff you have in the middle of a soap, then you can keep that level up higher. And then we want to remove that larger divider, and obviously just being careful, keep as much soap in the mould as you can. If you had any spare batter left at this stage, you could top them up at this point. And then you just want to take that middle divider and turn it round 180 degrees. Now I put that extra stick on mine to make sure I kept it level, but I don't really think it had much of an effect. Now what I did actually do with mine is I turned it and then paused a little bit I was trying to get a little bit of more movement in the swirl rather than the really static ring and then the very semicircular shape at the other end. And then I just repeated that for the other soaps that I had. And then once again I C-popped these overnight and I unmoulded them the next day, and I'll find that with these shorter tubes that I use I get 2 nice chunky bars of soap out of each one. So I'll just cut a couple of these on this video because we need to cut the other soap as well, and I'm worried about the video being really long. So here's the first one, and I'm not really sure. It's kind of done what it's supposed to do, but I'm not entirely sure whether I'm that keen on the effect of it. And then one of the other ones, I like this one a lot better. I like the fact that that sort of semicircular bit has almost got a bit of a movement to it with that. And then let's have a look at our other soap. Now I've gone back to my homemade single bar cutter here just because we need to cut these bars horizontally. So first of all I'm just going to cut it into chunks to give me the size of the bars that I want. And then we'll turn the bar so that we're cutting horizontally. So basically we're cutting from the top of the soap, you know, as you would have poured it into the mould, down to the bottom. So I'll just finish the cut of this and then I'll just leave you with the photos that I took as my entry for the competition. I entered, as I said, both this Swan Swirl and this Sea Wind Swirl. Overall, with the competition, it's not broken down into various categories, it's just the one soap that wins. Now, if you do want to vote in the competition, I'm going to leave a link in the description below so you can go and see all the entries, pick your favourite entry and then have a vote. I hope you've enjoyed this video, everyone. If you have, it would be great if you gave me a thumbs up. If you'd like to see what I'm making in the future, then why not subscribe to my channel? And if you've got any questions or comments, then please leave them in the comments section below. Thanks for watching, everyone. Happy soaping!